Any questions from last time? Okay. Just want to continue Grover search today. Let's remind ourselves what happened in Grover search. The purpose of Grover search was to find a marked element or find a marked element when few of the elements were marked. The algorithm can be explained as a picture. The entire algorithm ran in this two-dimensional plane. We have superposition over all unmarked states. And we have superposition over all marked states. Two vectors, there is a unique plane which is spanned by these two vectors. And the entire algorithm was going to run in the plane spanned by M and U. We had a state psi, which was an equal superposition over all elements. Let's say the angle was theta. Let's say number of marked elements is M. Total elements is N. Can you tell me what was the value of theta? An approximate figure will also be helpful.
Cos inverse root n minus m by n.
Cool. Right. If you at least remember that theta was actually sine inverse 1 by root n kind of a thing. And that's the reason, that's why the number of iterations became square root n. The number of iterations were 1 by theta, that's why they became root n. But if the number of elements were n, then theta is actually sine inverse square root of mi, which is same as cos inverse square root n minus mi as one of your answers. This was the picture, and the algorithm simply was to rotate this vector psi by angle. How much did we rotate by? In every iteration, 2 theta, right? And this rotation was achieved by how did we get it?
By taking product of reflections around U and psi.
Good. Product of two reflections around U. How did we rotate? How did we reflect around U?
Using the oracle OF.
Great. And how did we rotate around psi? This was H tensor. Okay. Remember, we had assumed n is equal to 2 to the power k. So as to make this simple. And we knew how to rotate about 0. That's why we could do all this. Right? This was the Grover search algorithm. This is what we did last time. Any questions about this? let me ask a question. What is the difference between two unitary operators, u and minus u? Unitary operator u and minus u in terms of implementing it on a quantum computer, right? U is a unitary. First thing, if u is a unitary, is minus u a unitary?
Yes.
How can you prove it?
Since minus u star is basically minus u star, right? So minus minus plus minus minus will become plus.
Okay, right. And all the eigenvalues will have the minus value, so the absolute value will remain same. Multiple ways to say it, right? All the columns will be orthogonal, so it is definitely unitary. Let me ask this question. If you know how to apply u on a quantum computer, can you apply minus u? Applying minus u should certainly be possible. It's a unitary operator.
I guess if we use some oracle that gives 1 on all the input elements, so there would be a global phase of -1 to the power 1 outside the. I mean,
Okay, how can we construct such an oracle?
such an oracle gives 1 on all the inputs, right? So irrespective of,
it gives a global phase of -1, right?
I mean, the function it implements gives 1 on all the possible inputs.
It gives 1 on every possible input. Okay, but so remember when we talked about oracles, we talked about this, that some oracle which takes value I and gives -1 xi to I, there was some discrepancy here. I needed to be to range from 0 to n and not just from 1 to n. You remember this? Let me ask it more clearly. That might refresh the memory. We had multiple oracles which we talked about. This is the standard oracle which you have seen. We said that even this is okay. This is just Hadamard transform. And even this was okay, but in this case, I ranges from 0 to n instead of 1 to n. What was the reason for it? Do you remember?
So we can differentiate between xi and minus xi.
Right. And the whole point was a global phase of -1 was useless, because any two states which have a global phase of -1 are indistinguishable for a quantum computer. Whatever measurement you will perform, whatever unitaries you will do, and you perform measurement, this measurement statistics will be identical if the state is psi or if it is minus psi. Now, do you want to tell me about u and minus u? Does that clarify things? No answers?
Sir, I actually did not understand this I ranging from 0 to 1 instead of 1 to 1 thing.
The point was that if I ranged from just from 1 to n, right, then the action of OX and action of O of minus X would be exactly the same.
Okay, I got it now.
Because they will only put a phase of -1.
And then we define something like OX0 is just 0 kind of a thing.
Exactly. So as to distinguish between the case of X and minus X.
Mm.
Right. So now, again, this is basically showing that U and minus U are exactly the same operator for a quantum computer. It doesn't matter which one you apply. Your final state will have a global phase of -1 if instead of U, you will apply -U. But then that doesn't matter because finally you will get the information using measurement and that's not going to change anything. That phase of -1 is not going to change anything if your final state is psi or minus psi. Right? In any point of time, if you're applying some operator and you can apply U, that's good enough. You don't have to worry about exactly applying -U. There is no distinction between U and -U on a quantum computer. Sounds good? Questions? So psi and minus psi indistinguishable on a quantum computer. Is that clear?
Yes.
Yes. And then that should apply U and minus U are also exactly the same operator because that will only give you a global phase wherever unitary is there. And that minus can always be ignored. Good. Let's come back. One of the reason was why I said this was that you might be confused between these. These two are the same operators for the purpose of quantum computer. Either you put a phase on 0 and leave everything else unchanged, or you put a phase of -1 on everything else and leave 0 unchanged. These two are the same things for a quantum computer. You don't have to worry about it. Let's continue. We will stay on Grover search today, but we will see some applications. Applications in the sense some more things about Grover search. First thing, as promised, was the case when number of marked elements are not known. And that's going to be the case most of the time, I think. When you are given a list, you are looking for some special items. You don't know how many times those special items can occur. There are very few cases when a promise is given, oh, the marked element will only appear once. In general, when you're searching in a list, what you are searching for can appear once, twice, thrice, and so on. And if that is the case, then Grover search seems to falter because we need to know how many times do we need to rotate. How many times did you need to rotate? It was approximately 5/2 divided by 2 theta. Remember, with some -1s and so on, but we are only interested in order. So we will skip this and we knew what theta was. Theta was approximately square root m by n. This will turn out to be n by n with some constant, which I will ignore. This is the times we wanted to rotate, where m was the number of marked elements. But if that is not known, what can we do? Any guesses? Let's try. Let's see.
If we do not know m, then I mean we are just doing it. I mean we would not know when to stop, but we would be doing the right thing, right? Applying Grover step, we would be reaching the required vector, the vector of all those marked elements, but we won't know if we are closer to it or we have moved past it.
Right, but the final step was actually to measure, right? And if you measure too early, then the state will be destroyed, right?
Hmm.
Let's see, actually the solution is actually pretty simple, and it relates to the Grover iteration. What was Grover iteration, G? It was the matrix which, what did it do?
Rotated by 2 theta.
By angle 2 theta. Perfect, right? Let me ask this question. Given a rotation matrix, let's worry about 2 dimension. Everything is happening in 2 dimension. I don't have to worry about anything else. What are the eigenvalues of r theta? First thing, what about r theta? Is r theta unitary matrix?
Yes, sir.
Right? Except verifying, can you see intuitively why rotation is a unitary matrix? You will multiply and then, but just by knowing what rotation is, it should turn out to you that it is unitary. Can you tell me why?
Because if it rotates xy axis, then it will, I mean, the angle would remain 90 degree only and the modulus won't change.
It will preserve the norm, right? You take any vector, you rotate it, the length of the vector will not change. And this is one way in which we define unitary operators. Or other way is that if you take 2 vectors, you rotate them by the same angle, the angle between them remains the same. That's another way to see it. Rotation does not affect the angle between the 2 vectors. It does not affect the length of the vector. And that shows it's basically a unitary operator. Now, that means its eigenvalues have absolute value 1. Let's try to find the eigenvalues of r theta. How will you find the eigenvalues?
Determinant of this minus
Good. Help
r
me
theta
out here.
minus.
This yeah. So let me do it, and you can also try to do it. All of you can also try to do it if you have pen and a paper. Or you can tell me, is that correct? Am I doing anything wrong?
No, sir.
Now,
Minus 2 cos theta lambda.
good. So all of you are awake. That's good. That means lambda is equal to, this is a quadratic equation, right? what was the formula? Minus g plus minus the discriminant. Discriminant is
4 cos square theta minus 4.
minus 4. Okay, divided by 2. This is cos theta plus minus.
J sin theta.
Sorry, what sin theta?
I sin theta.
I sin theta. This is e to the power plus minus I. Isn't that a great news? What does it tell you? If I apply phase estimation on G, what will happen?
I will get theta by 2 pi.
I will get 2 theta. Remember, Grover iteration G was a matrix which rotated by angle 2 theta.
Yes, 2 theta.
If I do phase estimation on G, I will get plus minus 2 theta. And from that, I can easily recover that. The number of marked elements. Good. That sounds good, but then what did we need to apply phase estimation? First thing was, can we apply the unitary itself and powers of it? Yes, that we saw last time. This can be applied. All these g squared to the power 4, all these I can apply easily. That's not a problem. What else did I need for phase estimation?
Eigenvectors.
Eigenvector. It's a small exercise. You can check actually that e to the I2 theta plus minus I2 theta has the eigenvector 1 by root 2 u. I think this signs get opposite. But anyway, these are the eigenvectors. And now, do we have these eigenvectors? No, I don't have any way to create them, right? Then what can we do?
We have the superposition psi, which is equal to
If I take the equal superposition, I will get u. But do I have u? I don't have either of m or u.
I can create a superposition with, I mean, 1 by, so that it gives me psi, I mean, the equal superposition of all the vectors.
Correct. If you think about it, you have a vector which is in the plane of these two eigenvectors, right? These two eigenvectors are in the same plane of u and m. That means, and these are obviously orthogonal. That means any vector in the plane of u and m can be created using these. And we know a vector which is in the plane of u and m. And you can actually do yourself, convince yourself, you should do it yourself, that express psi as a linear combination of u and m. Sorry, not u and m. these two eigenvectors. And it doesn't matter what are their relative amplitudes, because we are happy with either of the phases. We get 2 theta, we are happy. We get minus 2 theta, we are still happy. It doesn't matter to us. Right? So don't worry about what are the relative amplitudes, but if these are E minus plus, then psi can be written as alpha E minus plus beta E plus. That means I can run phase estimation on G with vector psi. And this will give us value of 2 theta or minus 2 theta. Either of them can be used for finding M. Using M, we can apply Grover's search. Which was the initial target. Sounds okay? Any questions? Am I missing something? Are you happy with this? Now everyone can apply Grover search. And then we will find the marked element in square root. Even if we didn't know how many marked elements were there. Sounds great, right? Remember, by any algorithm, any deterministic or even randomized algorithm, we kind of believe, we definitely believe that it will take at least order of n. Let me give you a hint. I'm still missing something. I have not given you a complete description. Can you tell me what am I missing? What else should I tell you? Okay, raise your hands if you believe that now you are convinced that a quantum computer can find a marked element even when number of marked elements are not known in square root n time. How many people believe it? Raise your hands. I see that no hand has been raised. Then why are you not convinced? Okay, one hand is raised. That's good. So if other people are not convinced, then why are you not convinced?
Phase estimation cannot find exact theta.
Phase estimation cannot, but even an estimation will do, right? You remember that theta is very, very small. And actually, if you think about it, this is M, this is U. We just need our vector to be such that the projection is like 2 by 3 or something, right? So this angle actually can be huge. It can be something like pi by 3 also. And even then, we will succeed with higher than 2/3 error or something. So even if we don't get the correct value of theta, even if we get approximate value of theta, that's good enough. We will rotate. This is a pretty big space, and even with an approximation, my vector will lie somewhere here, and then I can measure. I will get a marked state with high probability. So concern was phase estimation does not give exact theta. But that is not needed. Even approximate value of theta will work. Okay, let's try this. Let me tell you the algorithm again, and probably you can find out. Let's take the let's write the algorithm. We want to find a marked element. What would you do? You can say it in terms of overview, like big steps. You don't have to describe each step saying, oh, I will reflect about 0, 0 or something. But what was your strategy? You want to find a marked element in O, right? This was our intention. What will be the steps? What will be the first step? I can't hear you. If the microphone is not good, you can probably type it on chat or something. Anyone, other people can also opine. We have discussed Dover search last week and this week also. What would be the strategy?
So create a superposition state.
No. What will be the first step? You want to figure out
Number of market inputs.
right. So first step would be to do phase estimation on
Psi.
phase estimation on psi for unitary operator
G.
G. Yeah. Okay. So probably you were saying that we need to create psi. That's right. We create an equal superposition and we apply phase estimation on that. And then this will give us the number of marked elements, say M. And the second step would be take psi and apply G around 1 by square root of M by N steps, right? That would be these many steps. Agreed? This is our strategy. Now can you see what can be a problem? How will you prove that the query complexity of this algorithm is O of square root n?
Because M is greater than or equal to 1.
Okay. Right. But that will only be used for the second step, right?
And in phase estimation, we have queried Oracle. So
Right. The question is, what is the query complexity of first step? Even that we have to figure out, right? If to find the number of marked elements, I'm taking n time n, or number of queries are n, then there is no speed up from the classical case, right? Do you agree? This should be clear, right? You can't take as many steps as you like in the first step, or as many you can't do as many queries as you like in the first step. If your first step is expensive, I don't care. Your second step could just solve the problem in one query. How does it matter? The complete query complexity of this algorithm has to be square root n. Let's talk about phase estimation, how many queries we will need. And the argument I was talking about, that your vector, if it even falls, look at the top figure, and I was mentioning that even if your vector after rotation falls in this space, even then things work out. I don't need to find the exact number of rotations. In other words, you can do the calculations. If you want to succeed with constant error, it is enough to find m with precision root m. Even if I have error of root m, 2 root m, or even 3 root m in the value of m, even then, whatever be the number of rotations I will capture and then rotate, it will fall in the good zone. And I will find marked element with high probability. You can look at the proof in Nielsen and John. You can try it yourself also. The point is, even with this much precision, even with root m precision, you are going to be fine. You don't need to calculate the value of m exact. What that tells you is that, remember, n was equal to the power k. You want to do phase estimation with k by 2 bits. K by 2 with some small number of extra bits, so as to make the probability very high that you measure the phase. And if these are the number of qubits you are using, that means you will be applying operators g, g square, g to the power 2 power k. If you don't remember phase estimation, that's okay. Trust me on that. But you remember, we were applying g, g square, g to the power 4, and so on. And the highest power was g to the power 2 to the power number of qubits. And this is g to the power. How many queries did g need?
1.
Right. That means g to the power root n will need
Root n queries.
right. That means my phase estimation will also take only 4 root n. This is not a very major part of Grover search. Don't worry about it if you don't get it completely. It is just to convince you that we have a full method to find the number of marked elements as well as find the marked element in square root of n twice. This algorithm, when we actually find the number of marked elements, is called quantum counting. This completes full algorithm of Grover search in some sense. You generally Grover search is just the first part which we discussed last time, and you know the number of marked elements, you wrote it according to it. But now we know that even we can find the number of marked elements, and that's what this is in itself interesting. Many a times you are just interested in finding the number of marked elements, and this is how you can do it. We move on to the next topic, which is very related to Grover search, where in some sense we are going to generalize Grover search. Anyway, but before I go there, any questions about quantum counting? Okay. Even if few things were not clear in the first half of the lecture, don't worry about it. You remember Grover search, we can still generalize Grover search. It's independent. Let's focus on the problem and how to do it. This generalizing Grover search, this is also known as amplitude amplification. And once I explain to you the problem, you will see why it is called amplitude amplification. Let's go back to Grover search. What was it doing? We had a set X of all elements. Let's say X0, which was a subset of X, was the set of bad elements. These were the unmarked elements. We had X1, which was the set of good elements or marked elements. And obviously our task was to find a good element. This is what we saw. Classically, if I pick a random element, what is the probability that it is good?
Depends on the size of X0 and X1, right?
Right. In terms of this, it is this. Right? Let's say it is some, okay. It is some m by n. If there is no structure, I don't know anything about these good and bad elements, how they are distributed. There is no structure. The best thing you can do is repeat this step, pick a random element, one after another, till you get a good element. If you want to succeed with constant probability, how many times should I repeat this? This is the probability of getting a good element. And assume m to be very small, then this is not constant, right? If I want to repeat the step multiple times, such that my probability of success becomes constant, how many times should I repeat this procedure? Let's calculate it. Let's say this probability is P. If we repeat this L times, what is the probability of success?
One minus p power n.
To the power L,
L.
right? And we want this to become constant. That means we want to have 1 minus p to the L be constant, like 2 by 3 or half or something. Then that means what is L? Let's say p is equal to 1 by n. When will this become, let's say, close to 2 by 3? 1 by 3, let's say. No idea?
When you repeat this n times,
Sorry?
when you repeat this n times,
Yeah, so if I repeat it n times, then it will become
about 1 by e.
1 by e, right? In other words, if I want to make it constant, then I should repeat it order of n times. By the same logic, if I want to make 1 minus p to the power n constant, then L should be
Order of 1 by p.
exactly order of 1 by p. Is this confusing? Is this okay with everyone? Okay. That means classically, we would have needed n by m steps, around n by m steps. Classically, but quantumly, you can do it in square root n. That's much faster. No problem. Now, someone comes to you, they say, there is some structure in this x0, x1. Let's not worry about what kind of structure there is, but then there is a classical algorithm which finds a good element with probability q. Clear? And obviously q is better than m by. Suppose someone claims this, that there is some structure where in the search problem, wherever you were searching, some part of it was sorted, some part was special, we don't know. Some kind of structure was there, but that structure allows some classical machine to find a good element with probability q. If that is the case, how many times should this procedure be repeated to get a randomized algorithm? Remember, randomized algorithm should succeed with a constant. And anyone except Saya, how many times should I repeat this to get a randomized algorithm?
1 by q.
1 by. Like we repeated p, if the success probability was p, we had to repeat it 1 by p times. Now we have repeated it 1 by q times. If it turns out that 1 by q times the time required for this classical step, this classical algo, which uses the structure, if it is less than square root of n by m, then we lose the quantum advantage. what to do now? Can we use this kind of a apparatus for the classical algorithm to boost the quantum algorithm? Is there a quantum machinery which can utilize this structure or this classical algorithm? This is the question we are asking. And it turns out we can, and we will again get a quadratic advantage. What do I mean by quadratic advantage? Remember that if the success probability, this is again intuition, success probability of an algo was Q, classically to get constant probability of success, we need to repeat it 1 by Q times. Quantumly, to get constant probability of success, we just need to repeat it square root of 1 by Q times. This is what we are going to see. Like all commercial enterprises, there is a star. There has to be some condition to this algorithm, and then we can boost the probability. These are minor conditions, but under that, we can boost the success probability just by square root many steps of the classical case. So what we are doing is that clear? Since there are no questions, I will assume that this is critical. There are so many applications where you would need such a thing. You have some probability of success. Whenever you look at the literature of randomized algorithms, it is filled with examples where you create a smart thing which has a probability of success of, let's say, 1 by square root n, 1 by log n or something, and then just you repeat it log n times or square root n times to amplify your success probability. Right. Other way to say it would be that amplifying success probability from Q to constant requires 1 by Q steps classical. Remember randomized algorithms? We had some success probability. If we have a small success probability, we want to make it big, we repeat it. Classically, it requires 1 by Q steps. It turns out that quantumly, it will require only 1 by Q steps. And the reason is that we will be amplifying amplitude instead of probability. This is the intuitive reason, and that is why it is called amplitude amplification. How we will do it, that is going to come in like 5 minutes, but that is the intuition. We can amplify the probability much faster in the quantum case. The reason is that we don't amplify the probability directly. We amplify the amplitude and then measure. And that only requires square root of 1 by q. Let's see how to amplify probability. Remember our setup. Our Hilbert space would be the span of all elements. I can talk about space S1, which is the span of all x's such that x are good. We can talk about S0, span where x are bad. We will assume this is needed. If you want to amplify, then in the classical case also, you would need something, some device to check whether you have gotten a good element or not. That we will assume in the quantum case also. We will assume oracle, let's say x1, which tells us whether the element is good or not. In other words, it puts a space of -1 on x element of x1 and phase of 1. That means it leaves it unchanged on that. We have the oracle which stems, oh, this element is good, and it tells us whether this element is bad. We assume such an oracle, and if you, I didn't mention it, but even classically you need that. That is how you made this 1 minus p to the power L form. Such an oracle is given to us. Also, we said that we have an algorithm which succeeds with probability q. That means there is an algorithm which takes the state 0 and convert it into where B is an element of S0, G is an element of S1. That means I have an algorithm and finally it will create some superposition in my Hilbert space H. I am taking out the parts which are in the bad subspace and taking out the part which is in the good subspace. They combined, they give the complete space. So I can obviously write my final state in terms of a superposition of these two parts. Parts in B and parts in S0 and parts in S1. The parts in S0 is called B and part in S1 is called G. We knew that algo succeeds with probability q. What does it tell us about theta? That is saying that when I measure A0, that's the final state. I start with 0. I apply my algorithm A. My final state, when I measure, it falls in the good part with probability q. Right? What does it mean in terms of theta?
Sin inverse root q.
Exactly. The sine theta should be bigger than root q. That's obvious, right? The final state has an overlap on the good subspace with amplitude at least root q. That is when the probability of success would be at least q. Call the state psi. Let's draw a diagram again. This is the bad subspace. This is the good subspace. There is psi, which is the final state of the algorithm. let's say it is, yeah, theta is okay, bigger than sine inverse root q, but anyway, it's around sine inverse root q. Do you agree with this picture? Clearly, B and G again would be in some plane. They will have a unique plane, and psi has to be in that plane. Finally, we want to go towards state,
G.
right? Then what should we do?
Increase this.
Right. That means we should, knowing Grover's search, we should
Apply the iteration. Go step.
Grover's search kind of a thing, right? We should rotate it by 2 theta. That means we should let me just draw the picture here again. This should give you some time to think what we need. If you want to rotate, that means we want to reflect around B and reflect around,
Psi.
sorry,
Psi.
reflect around I,
No, psi.
reflect around psi. Okay. If we can, first thing, if we can reflect around B and if we can reflect around psi, then we can rotate by 2 theta. Right? How many times do we have to rotate? Again, this is same as Grover's search. You should be able to answer this. How many times do we need to rotate?
Order of 1 by theta times.
Right, something like pi by 2 divided by 2 theta. Right? As said, order of 1 by theta. And what was the value of theta?
Root Q.
Right, sin theta was at least root q, or sorry, at most root q. Wait. No. Sin theta is at least root q.
At least root Q.
At least root q. That means this will be order. Right? That means theta is bigger than root q. That means 1 by theta is smaller than root q. Again, you can put orders here if you want. Here, actually, yeah, order is not. That sounds good. That is what we wanted to do. We wanted to get to the good state in not q steps, but root q steps. There is something wrong here.
We order 1 by root Q.
1 by root q, yeah. This is what we wanted. We wanted to rotate, we wanted to get close to the good state in just root 1 by 2 steps. And this is what we have achieved if we know how to reflect around B and how to reflect around psi. Okay. Which one do you think is easy? Let me tell you, the answer is hidden on this page. One of the reflections is written on this page.
Around B, it's easy that we can get.
Right. We have a we have an oracle which marks whether the state is bad or good. That will give us reflection around V. This is just the oracle which marks whether the state is good or not. This is by definition. Remember, we said that OX1 is something which puts a phase of -1 on good states and leaves the states in bad as it is. That is reflection around. This is the easy part. Okay. What about reflect around sun? How will I reflect around sun?
Instead of using Hadamard like we did in Grover, we can use the algorithm A.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Just let me know if some statement is not clear. Someone just pointed to me that my voice is breaking off sometimes. So if you don't hear something, please let me know. I can repeat it. But yeah, the idea is like Grover search. Instead of Hadamard, use A. Let's just see it in action. Reflection around psi. What was it? This has to be
2 psi, psi minus psi.
great. I can think of it as and this is where the star of that statement comes about. We need A inverse. Remember, there was an algorithm which succeeded with probability P, or which kept the final state whose amplitude was root Q in the good part. If we have an algorithm, we can amplify the amplitude very fast, but it requires A inverse. In the quantum case, what are the operators which do not have an inverse?
Every operator has an inverse. They are all unitary, right?
Good. Every operator has an inverse. In a general quantum algorithm, you can have operators and what else?
Measurements.
Right. This implies A should not have measurement at any stage. Now, without star, we can write the amplitude amplification theorem. It says if there is an algorithm A such that A inverse also exists or can be implemented. I should say implemented. Such that the final state of A0 has at least root Q overlap with marked state. We can find marked state in order 1 by root Q. This is what amplitude amplification allows you to do. The algorithm was not difficult. It's the same idea as Grover search, but it allows you to use Grover search in a very, very general setting. Anytime you have a classical algorithm which succeeds with probability P, most of the time that means you have a quantum algorithm whose final step, you will have a state which will have more than square root P overlap with the good part. Let me just say it simply that whenever you have a classical algorithm with success probability P, most of the time a quantum algorithm A will exist on which amplitude amplification can be. For the same problem, I mean, obviously. And this will imply that you get a quantum randomized algorithm by repeating this A 1 by root P times. Classically, it would have taken order of 1 by P repetition. In many general settings, Grover search can give us this quadratic advantage. In many NP-hard problems, you are searching for some kind of a solution, and all those searchings could be in a black box way, can be made quadratically fast using a quantum computer. Notice I'm not saying that it will give us an algorithm for an NP-hard problem in polynomial time. No, this will only increase. This will only give us a quadratic speed up for most of the strategies for a NP-hard problems. That's what I'm saying. But won't give a polynomial time algorithm. We don't believe that we will have a polynomial time algorithm for an NP-hard problem on a quantum. That does not. It doesn't seem like that's possible. Still, this is very good. In many cases, we will have a quadratic speedup. Practically, it makes a lot of sense. Where instead of, let's say, 10,000 steps, you can only do it in 100 steps. That's much faster, right? Grover search is almost complete, or actually, it is complete. Next week, what we want to see is the optimality of Grover search. We have seen that if we have, let's say, one marked element, we can find that marked element just with square root n queries. Definitely, the question is, quantumly, do we need square root n queries? Answer is going to be yes. We will prove it next week. It will take us on a new adventure. We will learn a new field called quantum query complexity. I'm obviously biased towards it because that's my research area. I would be happy to introduce you to the very, very basic problem which started this research, which is optimality of group research. I will finish the lecture now. It is time for questions.
Sir,
Yes.
like for is